Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we unpack those really complex moments, where technology, law, privacy, security, they all just collide. And we try to break down not just what happened, but crucially, the technical how. Today, we are opening up a really significant file. I kind of define a whole era of encryption debate. We're talking about the saga around that locked iPhone 5C, the one recovered after the terrible San Bernardino shooting back in late 2015. For months, this one single phone, it became this huge flashpoint, probably one of the biggest legal battles we've seen this century. You have the FBI on one side and Apple CEO Tim Cook firmly on the other. Our mission today, it's a proper deep dive. We want to go beyond just the legal headlines. It's the stuff everyone heard about. We want to get into the slightly shadowy world of elite security researchers, reverse engineering, really understand the tech. We're going to break down this highly specialized multi-stage software solution that was built to crack this phone, a solution that ended up costing almost $1 million. It basically silenced the whole political fight, and it had this infamous name, the Condor exploit.
Yeah, what's really fascinating when you look back is that this entire confrontation, all the pressure, the legal arguments, the huge philosophical debate about backdoors, it all hinged on the security features that were designed to protect something incredibly simple, just a 4-digit passcode.
Right. Just 4 digits, 0000 to 9999.
Exactly, 10,000 combinations. On the surface, that sounds almost trivial for a computer, right?
Right.
But the amount of technical ingenuity, the sheer sophistication needed just to try those combinations without the phone basically destroying its own data.
Oh.
Well, that's where it gets truly astounding.
So we're going to explore the minds behind this solution, Condor. We'll look at the hidden flaws they found, the ones Apple didn't know about, and really dig into what that $900,000 price tag actually bought the FBI.
Okay, let's set the scene first. Because the reason the FBI felt such profound urgency, why they needed access so badly, it was born from this just unimaginable tragedy. The date was December 2nd, 2015, and the location, the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California. Now, this wasn't some random public space. It was a specific event. It was a routine holiday party combined with a training session for the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health.
Yeah, that's a really key point.
The people gathered there, the victims, they were colleagues, they were friends, they worked together every day. Environmental health inspectors, people focused on community safety and well-being. The atmosphere should have been, well, festive, relaxed. And the context of who carried out the attack makes the chaos even more, well, acute. The perpetrator, Syed Rizwan Farouk, he wasn't a stranger storming in. He was actually a county employee himself. He'd been at the gathering earlier, then left abruptly.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back just a short time later, he's with his wife, Tashfeen Malik.
And they weren't dressed for a party.
No. They were dressed in black tactical gear, heavily armed. We're talking .223 assault rifles, semi-automatic handguns, military style.
The attack itself, it was just shockingly fast and brutal. The whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around given the devastation. In that incredibly short time, they fired somewhere between 65 and 75 rounds, just spraying the room.
Into the crowd gathered in that rented banquet room.
They moved through the space, witnesses said, with this cold, clinical kind of malice. It wasn't random firing.
The sheer violence of it left 14 people dead and another 22 seriously injured. The victims, they ranged in age from 26 up to 60, just people enjoying a holiday event with their work colleagues. This wasn't just a mass shooting, which is horrific enough. It was clearly an act of calculated terrorism and carried out by someone known to the victim, someone who worked alongside them.
So immediately, the need to understand the motive, the planning, crucially, were there other people involved? Did they have help? This became a massive national security priority instantly.
Right.
The shooters, Farouk and Malik, they fled the scene in a black SUV. That triggered this huge manhunt across the area, which, as many will remember, ended hours later in a fatal shootout with police. But what they left behind at the regional center, that added another layer of urgency. And frankly, terror. They left a backpack. Inside, investigators found 3 improvised explosive devices. Basically, pipe bombs.
And a remote detonator was found nearby.
Which suggested?
Well, authorities believed, and it seems quite reasonable, that these IEDs were specifically planted to target the first responders. The police, the paramedics, the firefighters rushing in to help the victims of the shooting.
So it wasn't just the initial act of violence. It showed this strategic maliciousness, a plan to inflict even more casualties after the fact.
Exactly. It added this layer of organized intent. Something investigators had to immediately try and unravel. Who else knew? Who helped build these?
Naturally, the threat of these secondary explosions, it paralyzed the investigation scene for a while, making evidence recovery incredibly dangerous, very sensitive, very slow work. But once the bomb squad cleared the scene, once it was secured, investigators found it. The critical digital clue, the piece of evidence that would ignite this huge legal war we mentioned, a locked iPhone 5C.
And here's a really crucial detail, something that often gets a bit lost in the retelling. This iPhone, it wasn't Farouk's personal phone. It wasn't privately owned. It was actually a work device issued to him, but owned by the San Bernardino County government.
Ah, okay, so the owner of the phone actually consented to the search.
That's right. The county, the legal owner, said, yes, FBI, search the phone. The problem was purely technical. They had permission, but they couldn't get past the lock screen. They couldn't physically access the data.
Exactly. So even though the county owned it, Farouk had set a passcode, and it was locked. And in those first chaotic hours and days, with the sheer horror of the attack, the deadliness, the IEDs, this locked iPhone 5C seemed like the only remaining digital breadcrumb trail.
Mhm.
It might contain communication logs, maybe planning details, evidence of radicalization contacts, and the big one, were there co-conspirators still out there? Was this part of something bigger?
The FBI felt they absolutely needed to get inside that phone. And the clock was ticking. They needed it, like, yesterday.
Mm.
So the problem the FBI ran into was, well, it was immediate, and it was technical, and frankly, it was a direct result of Apple and really the whole tech industry significantly boosting user security, especially after the Snowden revelations about government surveillance a couple of years earlier. By late 2015, the software on that iPhone, iOS 9, it was specifically hardened against exactly the kind of forensic access the FBI now desperately needed.
Okay, so let's break down those specific technical roadblocks. What exactly turned that simple four-digit code into such an impenetrable fortress?
Right. There are basically 3 layers of defense working together on that iPhone 5C running iOS 9. First, as we said, the basic 4-digit passcode. That's 10,000 possible combinations, 1,090 up to 9999.
Seems like a lot, but for a computer.
Trivial for a machine to try, yeah, if it could try them quickly. But that leads to the second layer. That was the incremental time delay lock screen. You know how it works, right?
Yeah.
You put in the wrong code a few times.
Yeah, it makes you wait longer and longer each time.
Exactly. It starts locking you out for increasingly long periods. 30 seconds, then a minute, 5 minutes, eventually an hour between attempts. This feature is specifically designed to stop automated brute force attacks, to make them prohibitively slow.
Right. If you have to wait an hour after the ninth guess, trying all 10,000 combinations suddenly becomes, well, weeks, months, maybe.
Absolutely. It completely neutralizes the speed advantage of a machine for brute forcing, especially in a time-sensitive investigation like this one.
Okay, so the time delay was a big hurdle, but there was a third, even more critical one, right? The showstopper.
Yes. The third, and this was really the killer feature from the FBI's perspective, was a software mechanism designed to permanently erase the phone's encryption key, and therefore all the data, after only 10 failed passcode attempts.
10 tries. That's it.
10 tries. If your brute force attack, even one running super fast, didn't guess the right code within those first 9 attempts,
Right.
the 10th wrong guess would trigger a command to wipe the encryption key. And once that key is gone, the encrypted data on the phone is just meaningless digital noise. Gone forever. Unrecoverable.
Wow. Okay, so that was the ultimate failsafe. 10 strikes and you're out. Permanently.
Precisely.
So this technical reality, these 3 layers, they led directly to that huge legal fight we talked about. The FBI couldn't physically get in without hitting that 10-try limit, so they went to court. They used this really old law, right? The All Writs Act.
Yeah, from 1789, believe it or not. It basically allows federal courts to issue necessary orders when other laws don't cover a situation. The FBI argued it applied here.
And they weren't just asking Apple for a little help or a hint. They were demanding that Apple create something entirely new. A unique, custom-built version of its operating system.
Specifically for this one phone.
Yeah, and it quickly got this pretty ominous nickname in the tech world,
Yeah.
GovTOS.
Right. And the whole point of this theoretical GovTOS was simply to do 2 things. Disable that 10-attempt self-destruct feature and disable the time delay lock screen.
Allow the FBI to just hammer it with passcode attempt.
Exactly. Let their machines brute force it at full speed without penalty.
And this is really where the philosophical firestorm ignites. The FBI wasn't just asking for data. They were asking Apple to use its own secret sauce, its digital signature, to effectively create malware targeted at its own product.
Yeah, that digital signature is Absolutely fundamental. It's the core of the entire iOS security model. It's Apple's seal of trust. Every time your iPhone gets an update or installs an app, it checks for Apple's digital signature. That signature guarantees, yes, the software is authentic, it's from Apple, it hasn't been tampered with, it's safe to run.
So forcing Apple to sign this GovTOS?
You would be forcing them to weaponize their own trust mechanism, to sign something designed specifically to defeat their security features. That's a huge ask.
And Apple CEO, Tim Cook, he came out fighting. Very publicly, very fiercely. He argued that complying would set an incredibly dangerous precedent, a catastrophic one potentially, for global security. Creating this custom compromised software, even for just one phone, meant building a permanent backdoor into the iPhone's operating system.
His argument, and it resonated with a lot of people in tech and privacy circles, was that once you engineer that capability,
Yes.
once you prove it exists and you've signed it with your trusted key,
Yeah.
you can't control it. You can't guarantee it stays locked up.
Right. It's like inventing a master key. Once it's made, how do you ensure it's only used once?
Exactly. Could future U.S. administrations demand it? Could foreign governments, maybe less democratic ones, force Apple to use it on their citizens?
Or worse, could criminals or spies steal the tool or figure out how to replicate it?
That was the fear. So it really boiled down to this massive clash. The FBI's immediate national security need for evidence from one specific phone versus the potential risk to the fundamental digital privacy and data security of hundreds of millions of iPhone users worldwide.
The legal battle got incredibly intense. Lawyers filed briefs, experts geared up to testify. The whole world was watching. Would a court actually compel a major tech company to actively sabotage its own product security?
Yeah, we were right on the edge of a landmark legal decision.
Yeah.
Something that could have reshaped the relationship between tech companies and governments for decades.
But then, poof, it all just fizzled out. In March 2016, this completely unexpected twist happened. It just deflated the whole legal showdown.
The FBI suddenly, abruptly, dropped the lawsuit. They put out a statement, initially quite vague, saying they had, quote, successfully accessed the data on the iPhone, and they'd done it using a technical method they purchased from an undisclosed outside party. They didn't need Apple's help anymore.
Wow, so the whole court case just evaporated, and the question immediately flipped, didn't it? It went from, can Apple be forced, to who on earth managed to crack this thing, and how much did that cost?
Exactly. The speculation was wild for a bit.
Eventually, the outside party was revealed. It was this highly specialized Australian security company called Azimuth Security.
In Azimuth, they're not your everyday data recovery company you find online. Not at all. They are a very highly regarded, relatively small boutique hacking shop. They specialize in sophisticated offensive security research.
Offensive meaning breaking things, not fixing them.
Pretty much. They operate in that elite, often secretive space known as the zero-day market. Their job is finding and weaponizing software vulnerabilities that the vendor, in this case Apple, doesn't even know exist yet.
And who do they sell these capabilities to?
Primarily democratic governments, intelligence agencies, law enforcement, high-end clients with specific authorized needs. They're the experts you call when you need to get into hardened targets, people who find the unfindable flaws deep inside complex code.
Okay, so elite talent. And that kind of talent, especially for a problem this public and this difficult, it doesn't come cheap.
Not even close.
The price tag, when it eventually leaked, it was genuinely stunning. It told you everything about the difficulty level. The FBI reportedly paid Azimuth $900,000, almost $1 million.
$900,000. Just think about that number for a second. Nearly $1 million for access to one specific phone running one specific version of iOS, and the technical goal they achieved for that money, it was incredibly specific, incredibly constrained. It was just enable a perfect, unimpeded brute force attack. Try every code from 0000 through 9999 without triggering the data wipe and without being slowed down by those time delays. The complex chain of software exploits they built to achieve this ultimate system control. That was the solution codenamed Condor.
So that $900,000, it wasn't really payment for the data they hoped to find on the phone, not directly. It was payment for the incredibly rare intellectual property, the know-how, and the guarantee that they could bypass what was, at the time, arguably the most advanced consumer mobile security system on the planet, and critically, do it without Apple's help or setting that legal precedent. Okay, so we know the solution was codenamed Condor. We know it cost nearly $1 million. And we know it came from this elite Australian firm, Azimuth Security. And as you said, their whole culture is rooted in offensive security research, finding ways in. breaking software, essentially not building it or fixing it. So this wasn't about using standard forensic tools off the shelf. This required something much deeper. Reversing Apple's code, exploiting the core functions of iOS 9 itself.
Absolutely. To get that level of deep system access, that kernel control we'll talk more about, you need researchers with a very specific, almost preternatural knowledge of how iOS works under the hood. Often that knowledge comes from years spent working outside the usual corporate software development paths, maybe in academia, maybe in, well, less formal communities. And Condor wasn't just one single brilliant discovery. It was really the combination, the chaining together of highly specialized skills brought by two key researchers who were, frankly, legends in their respective domains.
Okay, so who were they? Who are the actual minds, the engineers at Azimuth who combined forces to build Condor?
All right, so the first key figure we need to talk about is Mark Dowd. Dowd is actually a co-founder of Azimuth Security, and his pedigree in the world of vulnerability research, it's genuinely top tier. He's a widely recognized expert in application security, known for his knack for finding those deep, often subtle, systemic logic bugs within really complex software systems.
So not just typos in the code, but flaws in the fundamental design or logic.
Exactly. Before Azimuth, he was a senior researcher at a company called Internet Security Systems, ISS, specifically their X-Force team, which back in the day was a real powerhouse of security talent. They found a lot of important bugs.
And he's not just someone who finds bugs, he literally wrote the book on it, right?
Co-authored it, yeah. He co-authored a highly respected foundational textbook in the field called The Art of Software Security Assessment. The title alone tells you a lot about his standing. It's a Bible for many vulnerability researchers.
Okay, so a true heavyweight in finding vulnerabilities in software applications. What was his specific role in Condor?
For the Condor exploit chain, Mark Dowd is credited with discovering the crucial initial vulnerability, the Mozilla Lightning Port entry point flaw. This was the first domino, the single vulnerability that allowed Azimuth to inject their own code into the phone's memory in the first place. It kicked off the entire exploit chain.
He found that tiny crack the first way in.
Precisely. He found that seemingly small, overlooked flaw in a piece of third-party code that served as their initial beachhead onto the device.
Okay, so Dowd finds the front door, or at least a slightly open window. He's the master vulnerability finder, looking at maybe higher level code, application code. But finding a way in is just the first step, right? Once you're inside, you need someone who knows the internal layout of the fortress. Someone who can navigate from that window through all the internal security, all the way to the control room, the kernel.
That is a perfect analogy. And that brings us to the second key figure involved in Condor, David Wang. Wang was, at the time, a senior security researcher at Azimuth, and his specialty was deep, low-level iOS exploitation, bypassing the core operating system defenses. And David Wang is extremely well-known, maybe even more famous in certain circles, under his online handle, Planet Being.
Planet Being, yeah, I've heard that handle. That name carries a lot of weight in specific communities, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's legendary, particularly in the iOS jailbreaking scene.
Jailbreaking. Explain that quickly for listeners who might not know.
Sure. Jailbreaking is basically the process of finding and exploiting security flaws in iOS to remove the software restrictions that Apple puts in place. Usually people do it so they can install apps that aren't in the App Store or customize the phone in ways Apple doesn't normally allow. David Wang, as Planet Being, was a key member of some of the most famous and successful jailbreaking teams in history. Groups like the iPhone dev team and later the Avad 3ers team.
The Avad 3s, they were huge, right? They released some major jailbreaks.
They were massive. Their work on finding vulnerabilities in iOS was so groundbreaking, so technically brilliant, that the authors team actually won a prestigious Pony Award back in 2013.
Pony Awards, those are like the Oscars for hackers, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a serious recognition from within the security community. Winning a Pony for iOS exploitation highlights that Wang's expertise wasn't just theoretical. It was proven, practical, real-world skill in repeatedly bypassing Apple's core security mechanisms.
So it's interesting. The jailbreaking community's motivation is usually about user freedom, device control, tinkering. But the deep technical knowledge they develop, understanding the kernel, the boot process, the core security architecture, that's exactly the kind of skill set that, well, intelligence agencies and groups like Azimuth need to gain access for their purposes.
It's precisely the same skill set, just applied differently. Wang's deep expertise is in that low-level iOS exploitation, understanding the kernel, the absolute foundation of the operating system, and figuring out how to manipulate it, how to trick it into granting full control or root access. So while Mark Dowd found that initial vulnerability, the way in through the Lightning port, David Wang is widely credited with the incredibly complex task of chaining that initial flaw together with two other zero-day exploits into the final working Condor tool.
Chaining them, meaning using one exploit to enable the next one.
Exactly. It's like picking a sequence of locks. The first exploit gets you through the first door, but maybe only into a hallway. You need a second exploit to get through the next door, maybe into a more sensitive area. And then a third one to get into the main control room, the kernel. Wang was the architect who figured out the exact, precise sequence of operations needed to elevate their access from that initial limited foothold all the way up to total system control. And crucially, doing it reliably without crashing the phone or accidentally triggering that data wipe. That's incredibly difficult.
Wow, so Condor wasn't just one magic bullet exploit. It was this perfect, intricate synergy. You had a classic, world-class application vulnerability researcher, Mark Dowd, finding the entry point, paired with a specialized, legendary, low-level OS exploitation expert, David Wang, who knew how to navigate the deepest internals of iOS.
That's it, exactly.
That $900,000 price tag, it starts to make more sense. It wasn't just for the code. It was for the combined decades of unique, hard-won experience embodied in those two researchers. Knowledge that let them see things in Apple's own code that maybe even Apple's engineers hadn't fully grasped.
And it really illustrates a core principle of this whole zero-day exploit market, right?
Mm-hmm.
The value isn't just about finding any bug. Lots of people find bugs.
Mm-hmm.
The real value, the million-dollar value, is in finding the right combination of bugs, the precise chain needed to achieve a very specific, very difficult objective. In this case, the objective was set by a major government agency with a critical national security mandate. Get the data off that specific iPhone 5C, and Condor delivered.
All right, now let's really get into the mechanics. This is the core technical part. We know the challenge. Brute force 10,000 passcodes, but without triggering the 10-try data wipe or getting stuck by the time delays. We know who did it, Mark Dowd and David Wang at Azimuth, using the Condor exploit chain. But how did Condor actually work? You mentioned earlier the ultimate goal was achieving kernel access. Let's start there. What does that really mean in practical terms?
Right. Kernel access is the holy grail for this kind of operation. To bypass a rule that's enforced by the operating system's software, you fundamentally need to execute your own code at a level above that rule. Or perhaps at the same level, but with the ability to modify the rules. The only place you can really do that effectively is in the operating system's kernel.
Okay, an analogy would help here.
Yeah, let's try one. Imagine the iPhone's operating system, iOS 9. It's like a huge, highly secure corporate headquarters building. The apps you normally use, your email, your web browser, your games, they're like regular employees working in their assigned offices on different floors. They have limited access based on their job function.
Okay.
The security features, we talked about the 10 attempt limit, the time delays, those are like the security guards at the main entrance and maybe at checkpoints inside. They're enforcing the building's rules, checking IDs, making sure employees only go where they're allowed.
Makes sense.
The kernel, however, the kernel is like the building's central security control room. Or maybe even the master facilities management office deep in the basement. If you gain kernel access, you're not just an employee anymore. You are the building superintendent. You have the master keys to every door. You can turn off the surveillance cameras, the security logs. You can disable the alarm systems, the data wipe feature. You can unlock any door, access any data, and you can do it all without the regular security guards at the front door even knowing. That's the level of total privilege control they needed.
Okay, that helps visualize it. Complete control from the inside. The kernel is the brain, the absolute core, and they needed to run their own program right there on the brain itself. So how did they get there? You said it was a 3-stage exploit chain. Let's walk through them. Stage 1, that was Dowd's discovery.
Right. Stage 1, the entry point, the foot in the door. This initial vulnerability, the one Mark Dowd found, was brilliantly subtle. And maybe a little embarrassing for Apple ultimately, because the flaw wasn't in Apple's own super secure proprietary core crypto code or anything like that. Ironically, it was a software flaw found within a piece of open source Mozilla code that Apple had incorporated into iOS for a pretty mundane function.
Hold on. Open source Mozilla code, as in Firefox Mozilla, running inside an iPhone. How did that work?
Yeah, it sounds weird, right? But it's actually common for large software projects, even proprietary ones like iOS, to incorporate well-tested libraries of open source code for specific tasks. It saves development time. In this case, Apple was using this particular chunk of Mozilla code to handle the communication protocols for certain types of accessories. Things you plug into the Lightning port, like maybe an external keyboard or certain charging or data transfer cables.
Ah, okay. So code designed to talk to things plugged into the phone's charging port.
Exactly. And Dowd discovered that this specific piece of reused Mozilla code had an implementation flaw, a bug in how it handled certain kinds of data coming from an accessory. So by creating a modified accessory, or maybe just a special cable, and physically plugging it into the iPhone's Lightning port, this accessory could send a specially crafted malicious data packet, just the right sequence of bytes. And exploiting that flaw in the Mozilla code allowed them to inject their initial payload, their first piece of custom, unauthorized code, into a restricted area of the phone's memory and get it to run.
Wow. So they literally used the physical charging port as the attack vector to smuggle their first piece of code inside. That's clever.
Very clever. And it highlights how vulnerabilities can creep in through third-party components, even in highly secure systems. A potential oversight in Apple's code review process for that specific library.
Okay, so stage one gets them a foothold, but you said it's restricted. Like they're inside the building but stuck in the lobby.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that initial code is running, but it's in what security folks call a sandbox. It's a low-privilege environment. It can't just reach out and touch the kernel or mess with critical system settings directly. It's contained.
So they need to break out of the sandbox.
Exactly. They need to elevate their privileges. And that brings us to stage 2 and stage 3. Privilege escalation and achieving kernel control. This is where David Wang's expertise in chaining exploits really came into play. These next two stages involved exploiting two more zero-day software flaws. Flaws within iOS itself, vulnerabilities Apple didn't know about and hadn't patched. Stage 2 used the second vulnerability in the chain to break out of that initial restricted sandbox and gain access to a more privileged process, maybe one running as the root user, but still not quite kernel level. Think of it as getting from the lobby past the first security desk.
Getting closer to the control room.
Getting closer. And then the crucial stage 3 used the third zero-day vulnerability in the chain. This was the final step, the one that bridged the gap from that privileged user process directly into the heart of the system. It granted them the ultimate prize, kernel access, full, complete, unmitigated control over the iPhone's CPU and the entire operating system. They were now the superintendent with the master keys.
Okay. That is the absolute pivotal moment in the exploit. They are inside the kernel. They have total control. Now, how did they use that supreme access to actually bypass the two big problems, the 10-attempt data wipe and those annoying time delays?
Right. This is the elegant part, the bypass mechanism itself. With kernel access, they didn't necessarily need to, permanently rewrite parts of iOS 9. That would be risky and might leave traces. Instead, they used their kernel-level privileges to load and run their own custom program, their own piece of code. You can think of it as a temporary patch or a hook that runs alongside iOS 9, but with full kernel authority. It runs outside the normal security rules because it is the rule maker now.
So it's like a little supervisor program they installed.
Sort of, yeah. And this supervisor program did two very specific things. Essentially, by reaching into the processor's operations and overriding the standard logic. First, it explicitly disabled the 10-attempt counter. It basically told the part of the system responsible for counting failed attempts, ignore the count, don't increment it, or, if you do, don't trigger the wipe command when it hits 10.
Just turn off the self-destruct sequence.
Exactly, meaning the phone could now receive endless wrong passcode attempts without ever wiping the data. Second, the kernel-level program also instructed the system to completely ignore the incremental timeout lock screen delay.
Ah, so no more waiting. They could just hammer the passcode entry.
Precisely. No 30-second wait, no 1-minute wait, no hour-long wait. They effectively turned off the penalty timer, which means their custom-built brute force script, also likely running with elevated privileges, could just fire passcode attempts at the login mechanism as fast as the processor could handle them. 00000000000000073, just cycling through the 10,000 possibilities at machine speed without any artificial delays or the risk of data deletion.
So if the correct code was, say, 5834?
It would likely find it in seconds or maybe a couple of minutes at most once the entire Condor exploit chain was successfully deployed and running. The brute force part becomes trivial once the defenses are down.
It's really important, I think, to stress this again for everyone listening. This Condor exploit, this $900,000 solution, it was an incredibly complex, multi-stage, software-based attack.
Absolutely.
It wasn't about, physically taking the chip off the phone's board and reading it with probes or using some fancy hardware device.
No, not at all. This was purely software exploitation.
It was achieved entirely through painstaking, highly skilled reverse engineering of Apple's iOS binary code, reading the compiled machine language, understanding how it worked at the deepest level, and finding those three specific implementation bugs or logic flaws.
Flaws that, when chained together in exactly the right way, granted them that ultimate kernel control.
It really proves the point, doesn't it? That even in systems designed to be incredibly secure, like iOS, often the weakest link isn't the encryption math itself or the physical hardware security.
Often, yeah. It's the sheer immense complexity of the software implementation. You have millions upon millions of lines of code interacting. And within that complexity, there are almost always going to be small, subtle, exploitable logic bugs hiding in plain sight sometimes. Just waiting for someone with the unique skills, the patience, and maybe the motivation, like Dowd and Wang, to find them and link them together.
And so, the final impact, the summary of it all. Azimuth Security, using the Condor exploit chain developed by Dowd and Wang, successfully unlocked that San Bernardino iPhone 5C. This ended that huge, high-profile legal battle with Apple. It prevented what could have been a landmark court decision forcing tech companies to build backdoors into their products.
The FBI got what they wanted, technically speaking, access to the phone's data.
However, and this is perhaps the most famous or maybe infamous irony of the entire saga, after all that effort, after the global debate, the congressional hearings, the nearly $1 million price tag, the phone was unlocked. And according to multiple subsequent reports, no significant new evidence was found on the device. No smoking gun about co-conspirators, no detailed plans for future attacks, nothing earth-shattering.
Yeah, that's a widely reported outcome, which again is fascinating, right? Because it means the value proposition of Condor, that $900,000, it wasn't really about the intelligence value of the data ultimately recovered. The value, the quantified nearly $1 million value, was in the act of finding those software bugs, those specific chained zero-day exploits. That price reflects the incredible technical difficulty, the extreme rarity of the skill set needed to find them, and maybe most importantly, the immense political and legal weight riding on Azimuth's solution succeeding. They paid that money, arguably, to avoid setting that dangerous legal precedent with Apple.
It's quite a story. We witnessed this massive battle. A single locked phone becomes the catalyst for this huge national security versus privacy debate, a debate that felt like it could reshape our digital world, only for the whole thing to be quietly resolved technologically by two brilliant, highly specialized security researchers leveraging existing hidden software flaws. Flaws that Apple, the maker of the software, didn't even know were there. And this whole episode, it raises a really important question. A final thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. The Condor exploit, as we've established, was purely a software attack. It targeted specific implementation bugs in one version of iOS, iOS 9. Now, once the existence of at least the initial flaw, that Mozilla Lightning port bug, became known, partly through the FBI's own eventual disclosures, Apple quickly patched it. That's how the security arms race works.
Other vulnerabilities get found, they get fixed.
So it makes you wonder, in our current world, where our devices are constantly being patched, where software updates are pushed out all the time, sometimes automatically, how long do these highly specific, incredibly expensive $1 million software exploits actually remain viable? If Condor only worked against iOS 9 and iOS 9 gets patched, does the value of that exploit just evaporate overnight? And what does that constant, relentless cycle, researchers finding flaws, vendors patching them, what does that mean for the real long-term effectiveness and longevity of digital security, both for attackers and defenders, as we move forward into an even more connected future? Something to think about.